All right, Barry. So, would you like to tell us a little bit more about your times living in Toronto?
Sure. As a matter of fact, I'll go back to that first day again because I remember it well. At 8 p.m. I'd gotten off the transcontinental train at Union Station. I went to the Central Y on College, just west of Yonge, and I registered there. Then, after I registered, I came out and I met a man who changed my life. What happened was this. I knew that Ryerson, where I was going to study journalism, was still open in the evening because they were registering students and so on. And so when I came out of the Y, there was a gentleman, maybe in his 40s, coming toward me, and I said, "Excuse me, sir, I wonder if you could help me find the Ryerson campus." And right away, he said, "Of course." He said, "It's very easy to get to. You continue along College here and you turn down Church and so on." But he then said, "Are you going to be a student there?" Because it was September. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What are you going to be studying?" And I said, "Journalism." And he was very interested, and he asked me about myself, and he asked me what I was studying, and then he wished me good luck. In other words, he was a friendly person. And I had come to Toronto with a completely opposite understanding of what Ontarians were like and what Torontonians would like. I had learned, because my mother grew up in Saskatchewan on a farm in the Depression, and Ontario had a very, very bad reputation among Westerners, and of course it still does, because the big implement manufacturers like Massey Harris were repossessing the farmers' equipment because they couldn't keep up with the payment. And my grandfather found out it was not worth it to load up his team of horses and put the crop in the wagon and go to the elevators in Prince Albert, because they were only paying 25 cents a bushel. It wasn't worth taking to market. And so I came loaded down with this idea that people in Ontario, and specifically in Toronto, were greedy and cold. And that first man destroyed that stereotype forever.
Wow. That is quite the amazing first encounter. And I really, almost, it's like fate. You just come here and your whole life, or your whole attitude and perspective is just suddenly changed
Just like that.
as you are beginning your journey as a university student.
Yep.
So I guess building off of this idea that maybe for those living outside of Toronto, that Torontonians might have negative stereotypes associated with them. Do you think that this is a view that has held up over the years? Is it something that you've seen change? Have you had any other experiences dealing with that idea?
I have. Over the years, I found that the dislike of Toronto has legs. It still is very much at play in much of this country, and I've lived in 6 or 7 provinces. And I'll just give one illustration. Around 1982 or so, it was around Christmas, and I was visiting, my wife and I were visiting my brother and his wife in Edmonton. And they have a lot of house parties in Edmonton. That's the way socialization happens. And so at one point, my brother said to people, "Hush now, I want to introduce my brother who's visiting from Toronto." Well, after he did that, I was shunned and avoided. I found myself all alone, like a little lonely petunia in an onion patch. Nobody wanted to talk with me at all, or my wife. And I learned I told my brother, "Look, we're going to go to other house parties. Don't breathe a word that I'm from Toronto. It just wrecks everything out the gate." And so he didn't, and things went much better. And what I learned to say, and I did this for years, when I met people and they asked me where I was from, and I'm talking about people on the West Coast, the East Coast, everywhere, I learned to say to them, well, either I was born in the Maritimes, if I was in the Maritimes, or I grew up in the West, if I was talking to somebody in the West, or I'm a Westerner, I would say things like that. But I would say I happen to be living in Toronto at the moment. And usually at the moment meant 27 years. But it's safer to say I happen to be living in Toronto at the moment. As a matter of fact, I still have that habit.
Well, even after 23,000 days.
That's right, after 23,000 days. So it does persist.
Yeah.
And there's also within Ontario regionalism, which also in which people have ideas about Toronto, province's capital, and they don't like it. You'll find that as you travel the province. And one incident sticks out in my mind as somehow being reflective of this. And this was when I was working for the Globe and Mail. I think was chief of the Queen's Park Bureau. There was a provincial election going on, and I was assigned to follow John Robarts, the then premier, who was seeking re-election, and he did get re-elected. So we were in a de Havilland Beaver flying in the north parts of Ontario, and I found myself in Thunder Bay. John Robarts gave his speech. I duly filed my story about the speech to Toronto, and then I had the rest of the evening free. And I was young, and I was unmarried, and I heard that there was a dance at the Legion Hall in Thunder Bay. So I made my way to the Legion Hall, and I ordered a beer, and it all seemed very friendly. And I saw a young woman nearby who caught my eye, and I had the nerve to say hello to her. And she said hello back, you know, so things were going well. And I don't know what we talked about, but it wasn't too long until she spotted that I wasn't a local. And she asked me where I was from. And I said, I'm from Toronto. And she said, testily, oh, you think you're so darn smart, don't you? And she walked away. So that was the end of my chance of getting a date in Thunder Bay. Once again, the Toronto connection was fatal.
Your story, particularly the Edmonton one, reminds me, just brings to mind like one of the first episodes of Corner Gas, the Canadian sitcom, where Lacey, who ends up owning the cafe next to the gas station, comes and she arrives and she introduces herself as being from Toronto, and the whole plot of the episode is her basically trying to win over the local Saskatchewan residents because they all think that she must be like snobby and highfalutin and like not one of them. So she eventually becomes accepted into the community, but she has to sort of prove her mettle.
Yeah.
They're very skeptical of her as a Torontoan.
Yeah. So that Corner Gas had it nailed. And that's one of the reasons Corner Gas was such a success. And it goes on. I guess it's probably true in every country that the people in rural parts of France, they probably think the Parisians are stuck up and full of themselves. But anyway, I'm an Ontarian, I'm a Canadian, and I've experienced this myself over my lifetime.
Yeah, and you can, with Canada being such a large country, you can see how for like Westerners living out in the prairie provinces, there's a big disconnection, not only in terms of being rural versus being urban, but also the economic factors. You mentioned the farming during the Great Depression, and currently with oil and other things of that nature.
Yeah, it keeps that regionalism, call it, it keeps the regionalism pot boiling. Mm-hmm. There's always some beef, there's always some beef that a smaller province will have with a larger province, or people outside of cities have about cities. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we've pretty well covered that.
Yeah, and I must wonder as well today, with maybe the country being a little bit more diverse and more spread out, more people have moved from the country to the city and vice versa, that maybe those attitudes are starting to abate a little bit, would be my hope.
I imagine they are, but even I know that in Collingwood, where my wife's sister moved to, they still use the term cityots to refer to people from Toronto.
Oh wow, I had never heard that term. It's a funny one.